Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to cover the entire Korean War in this one video. So, it's a very simple war, and it's all about containment. And by now, you should know what that word means. It's containing the spread of communism. As World War II was winding down right before the Japanese surrender, basically Russia took over North Korea, okay? And they turned it communist. Now, he has a puppet dictator that's in charge of North Korea for him, and they're part of the Warsaw Pact. So the Korean War lasts from 1950 to 51, but to be honest, it's still officially lasting today, okay? As a result of World War II, Korea was divided into Communist North Korea and Democratic South Korea at the 38th parallel. North Korea launches an invasion of South Korea on June 1950. Now, if you remember, by the way, you'll see the one in red, that's the Korean Peninsula, okay? So, if you remember a couple of videos back, I talked about how the United Nations refused to seat Mao Zedong on the UN Security Council. When that happened, Joseph Stalin got very angry because he couldn't have his communist buddy Mao with him, and he quit the United Nations. He quit it. And then he told his puppet state, North Korea, to invade South Korea. So that sounds ominously familiar. Right before World War II, remember, Hitler took over the Rhineland, he quit the League of Nations, and then he started conquering other territory. So it looks like Korea is the start of World War III, okay? And it still might be, we don't know yet. All right, so the Soviet Union walked out of the UN protesting Taiwan as being accepted as the Chinese delegate to the United Nations as opposed to Red China. Since the Soviets were not in the United Nations, they could not stop the UN from helping South Korea to defend itself. The United States would provide a majority of the troops because we're trying to contain the spread of communism. You got a communist country trying to take over a capitalist one. The Truman Doctrine kicks in, containment kicks in, and we have to help these people according to our foreign policy. Okay, the U.S. is following its containment. Yeah, okay, I just said that. Okay, so here is the war in 4 maps, basically. Okay, at the start of the war, we're at the 38th parallel. Communist North Korea, capitalist South Korea. Okay, at the top you have the Yalu River, and this is China. Okay, so it starts out with a huge communist push down, and they actually took all of this red territory. All the red is communist, and they actually pushed the South Koreans all the way down to one city called Busan. Okay, at this time, America gets involved. And America is in Busan with the South Koreans. Well, as the shelling commences, as the siege keeps going, it looks pretty bad. It looks like the city's about to be overrun. And then the Americans all get in their ships and they sail away. And the North Koreans think that we got this won. This is over with. Well, not quite, because General MacArthur and the Americans, they did sail away in a big circle, and they came right here and they hit the North Koreans at Incheon. And they cut the country in half, and they started moving in south and north and pushing the North Koreans all the way back. So now the blue is what we're gaining. So we pushed them all the way back to the border of China. We had North Koreans spilling over the Yalu River at this point. And at this point, unfortunately, Mao Zedong thought that's the leader of China, thought that America was invading China. That's scary. He amassed millions of soldiers here in Manchuria, China. And he started sending wave after wave after wave of human attacks. Okay? So they're coming over the border, they're spilling over, and they are beating us badly. In some battles, we are outnumbered 98-1. That's a really rough battle. Okay? Mao did not care how many men he lost. We were losing a bunch. So right whenever it gets to the 38th parallel, basically, and the borders are just like they were almost, a miracle happens. The whole reason for the war stops. Joseph Stalin died. Joseph Stalin is the one that told North Korea to invade South Korea. Now, I like the way Joseph Stalin died, okay, because he deserved it. So here's what happened. Stalin had a rule. His rule was that nobody was to disturb him while he was in his bedroom, in his living quarters. And it was punishable by death. And it didn't matter who it was. So you can knock on the door, but if you entered without permission, you would be executed. Well, Stalin was enjoying a nice night. He had his supper, he drank a bunch of vodka, and then he had a stroke. And he laid down on the floor for 8 hours, using the restroom all over himself, having stroke after stroke after stroke after stroke. And nobody would dare to enter the room because of his own orders. So finally, 8 hours later, they busted down the door and they found Stalin completely inebriated and crazy, and he died. Okay, so that is the story of the Korean War. I went through all this stuff. Now the Korean War is over. Now what happens is, at the end of the war, they agree to go back to the regular, the line, the 38th parallel. So at the end of the war, it looks like the beginning of the war. It's all the same. America has kept troops on the southern border of North Korea ever since the 1950s. We're still there today, folks. Okay? That's basically the whole Korean War. It was meant to stop the spread of communism. Again, North Korea trying to take over South Korea. Now, in the middle of the war, whenever we get to this part where Mao is sending tons and tons of troops, General MacArthur calls the president, President Truman, and says, listen, I know where all the enemies are. You need to nuke them. Okay? He wants them to drop atomic bombs in Manchuria, China. And President Truman refused because he said that if we bomb China with a nuke, then Russia is going to bomb us potentially, or South Korea with a nuclear bomb. So that was the first big standoff, nuclear-wise, between the two countries. Okay, let's see if we got anything else. Okay, after Stalin's death, we get Nikita Khrushchev that takes over. Okay, eventually the Korean War ended in a draw, and Stalin died. He was replaced by Khrushchev. This is Khrushchev right here. I like his quote. He says, "We cannot." Well, actually, I don't like the meaning behind it, but it sounds very familiar to what's happening today in our country and what's been happening for the last 50 years. We cannot expect the Americans to jump from capitalism to communism. Okay, but we can assist their elected leaders in giving Americans small doses of socialism until they suddenly awake to find that they have communism. That was the plan of the Russians. Ever since then, we have been inching ever so slowly towards socialism and maybe eventually communism, even though I doubt it. I think we will be a socialist country eventually, unfortunately. So, all right, y'all, that's it. That's the Korean War.